the talking point that emerged was that Boris was dodging any responsibility, and that by announcing he would not be leader of UKIP, that Nigel Farage was dodging any responsibility, as if they both resigned from their respective parliaments and went to the top of a mountain to become gurus or something instead. Neither one shirked their responsibilities. I didn't know this when I made the main part of the video, but I mentioned that, as far as I know, Michael Gove was making himself available to work with this government. He wasn't chosen, but it doesn't really matter because he was eliminated not by his own choice. He was eliminated by the Conservative Party election process. So it wasn't a voluntary decision of his not to be involved with the government. He wanted to be the prime minister, so obviously he wanted to be involved with the government. Andrea Leadsom also wanted to be prime minister. She withdrew from the race. I don't want to belabor that point, but she sought a position in the government and she accepted one, and obviously she didn't demand any particularly notable positions. She didn't demand to be chancellor or finance secretary or anything like that. I doubt Theresa May said, "What position do you want?" and Andrea Leadsom said, "I'd like to oversee the environment and agriculture." But the important point is she made herself available to be in the government, and she took the position that was offered. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Philip Hammond as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which was one of only two positions I knew about when I made the main part of this video. But the point is the top four people that were being complained about as Leave campaigners who were running away from any responsibility, none of those four people ran away from any responsibility. 16 members of the cabinet, including the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister's appointments, there are 15 Remain supporters and 7 Leave supporters. I think that roughly corresponds with the public expressions one way or the other within the Parliamentary Conservative Party. Obviously, it doesn't correspond well with the Leave versus Remain in the country as a whole. The positions that relate to things that are going to be changing in the European Union are, as far as I can tell, almost exclusively filled with Leave supporters. Andrea Leadsom's position doesn't really relate to Brexit negotiations, but there are a lot of changes that are made with not being in common agricultural policy, with not being in the common fisheries policy, which I understand is within her brief, as they call it. So, environment, agriculture, and fisheries are all going to change substantially. I'm not really sure what International Trade Secretary, International Development Secretary, and Foreign Secretary, where they draw the line between those things. But Priti Patel, the International Development Secretary, and Boris Johnson worked a lot together during the campaign, so I'm sure they'll work together well. Liam Fox is a very experienced member of the cabinet, not anytime recently, but he was last in the cabinet in 2011. I suppose it's good to have someone like that. He might be able to kind of be a guiding hand for Priti Patel and Boris Johnson, even though he had some substantial scandals in the past. They didn't seem very minimal. Experience won out there. I don't think he had conflicts with people. I don't think he, despite allowing some information to get into the wrong hands, it was only information that went to one person that shouldn't have gone to. It didn't go to the world of the internet that it shouldn't have gone to. And he also had an issue with overclaiming expenses, and he had to pay some of them back. He's definitely not someone that's free of making mistakes. Someone who hopefully has learned from those mistakes and knows the ins and outs of of how cabinet positions work, and I don't think there's any suggestion that he's been disloyal to anybody. Right after his bid ended, he endorsed Theresa May, and that probably helped him to get a position on the cabinet. It's a new position, but perhaps it will be a permanent position given the increased trade role of the UK government on its own rather than being represented by the EU. And I've mentioned the WTO. UK doesn't have a seat on the WTO that might be remedied shortly. Up until now, they haven't been a direct member of the WTO because obviously the decisions regarding tariffs or lack thereof with other countries was handled by the EU. There are prominent Brexit campaigners in all the most relevant positions from what I can tell. The main reason I'm doing this is Theresa May has just become the Prime Minister, and I'm not confident in her Brexit commitment, or especially not in regard to immigration and multiculturalism and things like that. I think she's done a bad job with those things as Home Secretary, but she has expressed a commitment to follow the will of the voters, including the will of the voters in regard to immigration. But there have been a couple of encouraging signs. Her first appointment was Philip Hammond as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I think that's a positive development. It's only mildly positive at best, though. But the really exciting thing was the appointment of Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary, which is Philip Hammond's former position. I think that shows a really good commitment to having Brexit voice in a position that's going to be essential to making the agreements that, as Theresa May said, to make a success out of Brexit. And I think he would stand up to any backsliding or whatever you want to call it. I mean, even more so than in the U.S. when you get approval from Congress to appoint a new person. That's not the case in the U.K. You can change cabinet secretaries like changing a pair of pants if you want to, but or whatever garment Theresa May wears. If there is something going on that isn't correct and they have a disagreement about it, she can fire him or he can resign. And the Conservative Party lately isn't nearly as bad as the Labour Party lately, but those officials can be replaced, and there can be major falling outs that can take place. So it's not a guarantee that Boris will be in the position when Article 50 is invoked, not to mention the 2 years of the Article 50 process, but it's still a really encouraging sign, and it also counteracts the ridiculous narrative that the people who were part of the Brexit campaign are running away from any responsibility. Boris had no cabinet role whatsoever in David Cameron's government. He went from having no ability to affect any policy, and he remained having no ability to affect any policy. Now we're less than 3 weeks after the vote, and he's in one of the top 3 or 4 positions in the entire government. So obviously he's not running away. Obviously another one is Nigel Farage. He's not going to be the leader of UKIP, but that's not a position of any authority involved in the Brexit negotiations, because UKIP only has one member of parliament, and he and Farage don't get along, and they kind of butt heads on the immigration issue that I mentioned. Douglas Carswell, the UKIP member of parliament, doesn't even like to talk about immigration. Not that I think Theresa May does, but she's, like I said, in the last few days at least, she's made the effort. Douglas Carswell doesn't even want to make the effort on immigration. Nigel supported Andrea Leadsom, but Andrea Leadsom had said that she wouldn't give any position to Nigel as part of the negotiation team. I doubt there would be any kind of role under Theresa May either, which she and Nigel were obviously on different sides, but funny things can happen in politics, that there could be at least some mild consultation. I don't think Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are best buddies or anything, but that my impression is they have a cordial relationship, at least. Some suggestion that at one time that if Boris ever did become prime minister, that the Conservatives and UKIP could have some kind of electoral alliance. I guess it's still possible in the future. Obviously not, as I said, Nigel's not going to be the leader of the party anymore, but before he resigned, he even mentioned that, maybe UKIP can do things a little bit differently next time. They did concentrate their resources in a dozen seats or so, where they got around 30% or more. Nigel was suggesting they could concentrate even more and just not even run candidates against people like Michael Gove and support other kind of anti-Europe conservative types that would be on UKIP's side on a number of these issues anyway. And another one is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who actually argued prior to the last election that there should be a pact between UKIP and the Conservatives. That makes sense not to have candidates against people like that. There are also a number of seats where it doesn't matter what you do. There's just a safe Conservative or Labour seat, and a lot of them, at least in Labour's case, a lot of their safe seats go back 70 years, and some of the Conservative safe seats go back even longer than that. So if the winner gets 60% of the vote and the closest second place finisher has 25% of the vote at the last election, it's probably not a race you want to expend any resources in. There are some exceptions. Sometimes there's a scandal of some sort that makes the person less popular. I think that happened a little bit in some of the northern elections, especially the one in the area of Rotherham, and I think Rochdale was another one, and then another child abuse, grooming sort of situation. So, but anyway, getting back to Nigel, he's still president of his group in the European Parliament. They title a lot of people president, but regardless, he's the leader of one of the handful of groups that are in the European Parliament. I think originally there were 6, and maybe there are 7 now, something like that. That's one of the top 10 positions in the European Parliament. So there's some ties with what's going on there that he'll be able to have some insight in, if not any particular influence. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the whole of the United Kingdom doesn't have any particular influence, especially since the British commissioner resigned, so they don't even have a commissioner right now, which doesn't make any sense. But one of David Cameron's cronies, so he was actually, I think he was previously a member of the House of Lords. He figured the new person wasn't going to want him there, and he didn't want to be involved in winding things down at the EU level, which obviously David Cameron didn't either. So, I guess it made sense. It made sense personally. I think it was wrong for him to do that at such a crucial time, but it's not surprising. There's a particular attraction to people that have either been voted out or that had some position like the House of Lords, where they didn't have to be elected, and they just had to rely on the patronage of particular politicians. I would say that knocks out 2 of the 3 main people that there were gripes about people not being on the scene after the Brexit vote aspect. Then they immediately complained when Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage didn't have any particular role in the government going forward. Now they complained when Nigel reduced his domestic political power, and when Boris realized he wasn't going to be prime minister and dropped out of that race, even though that kept him at the status quo. So they made a kind of anticipatory complaint about them being involved. Then they complained about them not being involved. I'm just waiting for the social justice bitter maniacs like Thunderfoot to complain that they have an increased role now, and oh, look how terrible Brexit is. The main parts are that these prominent Leave campaigners aren't going anywhere. The secondary point is I think it's encouraging the two cabinet appointments that Theresa May's made so far. Just to say a little bit more about Philip Hammond, he was seen as a more Eurosceptic type of person than William Hague, who was his predecessor as Foreign Secretary. He had some criticisms of the European Union, even though he did decide to support remaining in. I don't remember him making a lot of appearances. I don't think he was in any of the multi-hour debates that took place. He wasn't an enthusiastic Remain supporter, and he was never seen as a Europhile. And also, George Osborne all but predicted the death of the firstborn as a result of a Brexit, and there are very few people that I think would have been worse as Chancellor from Brexit perspective than Osborne. I suppose there are people that could have been more incompetent. I'm not a Theresa May fan all of a sudden, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the couple of things that we've seen so far, and I have at least some hope that there will be a role for people that are serious and committed Brexit supporters, and I'll leave it at that.